Hear ye. Welcome to the What is Truth podcast. Hope everyone is doing rather exquisite. Today is the 4th of July. Today, America is 250 years, and I'm joined by the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Don Jeffries. How are you, sir?
Oh, it's great to be back on with you, Weezy.
Yeah, it's been a while. And for those that may not be too familiar with you, before we get started, if you can give us a little bit of your background.
Well, I've been a thought criminal. I'm wearing that mantle now. I'm one of the veteran thought criminals in America. Always been one. Unlike a lot of people, I never had an epiphany. I was a radical, certainly from the time I was a teenager, and even as a little kid, I questioned everything. So I've had my toes in these waters forever. I started on the JFK assassination path as a teenager, working with Mark Lane's Citizens Committee of Inquiry, and that was my, still my wheelhouse issue. But certainly I have wandered into all other areas, and now I'm just a, Mr. Conspiracy, I guess, because I do think people say, you think everything's a conspiracy? Well, yeah, I do, because I think we're ruled by conspirators. So that's what they do. They conspire.
Yeah, I think you and I share many of the same views, and we get viewed as extremists even in the conspiracy realm, and I have no problems with that. Hell yeah, I'm a little out there, and there are a few views that we may view things a little different, but the one thing that we both can agree on is our ardent defense of freedom of speech. And I often I see some things that you post and I don't necessarily agree with, but that's freedom of speech. That's what freedom of speech is about. Freedom of speech isn't about supporting speech you already agree with. It's right. Supporting speech you don't agree with at all. That's what freedom of speech is all about. So today should be a fun show. This entire week I had been going down the Thomas Paine rabbit hole. I think most of us at some point have heard of Thomas Paine. We've heard of Common Sense. We've heard that his pamphlet inspired is really what got the revolution going. But how many of us really know the life and story of Thomas Paine? Thomas Paine's story is incredibly fascinating and tragic at the same time. This is a guy who was born poor in England, came to America, and again, his pamphlet Common Sense really inspired everyone to get up and say, screw monarchy, screw the king, let's do things on our own. And he didn't stop there. He kept going, but once he kept going, even the Americans, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, kind of ghosted him. And when he, at the time of his death, only 6 people, 10 people were at his funeral. And to this day, no one even knows where his remains are. So we're going to cover the entire story because, again, it's incredibly fascinating. I think more people should know about this story. And so I can't thank you enough, Mr. Don Jeffries, for joining me, because who better to have than you on this specific day. So tell us a little bit of Thomas Paine's beginnings. I kind of gave everyone just a little super brief synopsis, but let's get into the details of his life and all that jazz.
You did a good job. I mean, he wasn't, almost all the founders were one percenters. They're very wealthy. And you said that Paine didn't come from wealth, which made him a little unusual. And I think philosophically, he was the heart of the revolution. In my book, Crimes Uncovered, I have a lot. I cover the story of his missing remains and all that stuff. It was very tragic. But I think it was Adams, who didn't like him, that said, there would not have been, a war for independence without Paine. He made it possible. He was kind of the mental spirit, or whatever, the spirit behind the revolution, because he really believed in it. He was a revolutionary. I'm not sure how many of those other guys were revolutionaries, certainly to the degree that he was. And I remember as a young guy, again, I was a far left radical then. And Thomas Paine's the first one that jumped out at me from that generation, because he was the most radical. And I remember reading Common Sense as a very young guy, and it resonated with me from the opening words, these are the times that try men's souls. And so he was like the real deal. And I talk a lot about the founders, and I love them, other than Hamilton, but the rest of them, I think were great in varying degrees. But Paine was kind of, considering the role he played, and you're right, he did, because this was always it was a one percenter thing. The Sons of Liberties were all very rich people, and Paine was the one who was responsible for getting to whatever amount of the people supported it, and I'm still unclear. Wasn't that great a percentage, I think, that actually supported a war for independence. But the ones that did were influenced by common sense, which was distributed widely and read widely, and made him famous. And he was kind of the voice of the revolution. But if you look at his what happened to him, now he ended up going to France, where he ended up almost being beheaded there. He turns, same thing kind of happened to him here. As you said, Washington especially turned his back on him, and I quote the very bitter poem he wrote to Washington. Your heart is made of stone, and he was very bitter at Washington because Washington didn't even attempt to get him released from the Bastille, and where he was thrown afterwards. And he could have. Washington had connections with everybody over there. He could have, but he didn't do it. So he never forgave Washington for that. But I want to correct you on one thing. Jefferson didn't turn his back on him, and as I talk in my book, Jefferson was criticized very strongly because he invited Paine to the White House. He was persona non grata, and he let him stay there. And even his daughters asked him why. And he said, "This is a great man. How am I going to turn my back on him?" So
I definitely agree. Thomas Jefferson, even in the private letters between them, you could tell he held them in high esteem. It's the fact that he didn't publicly really outright claim his support, because Thomas Jefferson understood how polarizing a figure Thomas Paine was. So that's what I was trying to get at.
Yeah, no, it's odd to think that he never, he wasn't named in any cabinet position. And for that matter, neither was Sam Adams or John Hancock. The most radical ones, John Hancock was governor. But so I think even then you saw the process by a lot of the most Patrick Henry was. I mean, he didn't live to that long, but he was, because these were the most radical ones. And they were kind of weeded out in terms of more people that were willing to be more pragmatic, like Madison and people like that. And but Paine's story is sad in that he was really the heart of the war for independence, and his book had Common Sense had a lot to do with inspiring people to fight for it. But his name is remembered to some degree. But if you look at the early American history, once we became a republic, he's nowhere to be found. He was in France at one point in prison, but he didn't hold any. As far as I know, I don't think he held any elected positions, which is unusual.
Yeah, I mean, his story begins up in England, and he was the son of a hardcore Quaker dad, and so when he was growing up, from what I understand, he was a teacher for a little bit. He even tried his hand at privateering for a little bit. He was a tax collector, and none of those jobs really filled him. And it wasn't until he came over to America. And I think those jobs, though, is what really helped shape his mindset on how the monarchy worked. He would often pen. He was joining debate systems over in England, and he was writing up letters criticizing the king and the whole monarchical system under a pen name, obviously, because you have to imagine censorship is bad today, but it was a lot worse back then. So he had to use a pen name, and his pen name was Common Sense, and that's why some people think that's probably why that pamphlet was later called Common Sense, for that angle as well. But when he came over, I mean, anyone that hasn't read Common Sense, you are missing out on a lot, because when you read what he is stating in his harsh criticisms of ruling through, via inheritance, oh, because you're born this, because of your this bloodline, that makes you better than all of us. Get the hell out of here.
Mm.
His criticisms were so on point, and even though it was written 250 years ago, I mean, they still hit today. And it truly, this is why I want to do a show on it today, because I feel most people know that little part of Thomas Paine, but I wanted to get into a little bit more of the details. Um, what what was it that made him polarizing to, you know, like a George Washington later on? And in my opinion, it's because he was so ahead of his time for that period.
No, he was, and he was. I mean, just to challenge the monarchy was a big deal. But I'm from, fond of saying that the underlying principle of the war for independence was the consent of the governed. And this was a revolutionary. John Locke, and it had been talked about a little bit, but in terms of, it was codified, beautifully in the Declaration of Independence. But Thomas Paine inspired. In fact, a lot of people, I don't know, but a lot of people claim Thomas Paine really wrote much or all the Declaration of Independence. Who knows? Because I love Jefferson too, but it has a lot of his thoughts in it, clearly.
But he refused to sign it, which is also one of those little known facts.
Yeah, which is, I don't know. I guess he just didn't want to. So I don't know what he would object to about that. Because to me, it's, someone said that the Declaration of Independence is what we're supposed to be celebrating, 250 years, is the only thing in terms of greater literary content in the English language would be the Bible, and in terms of significance. And I think it's just an amazing document. And Paine, I don't know that he wrote it or contributed to it. Some people say that, but in common sense, you can see he's delineating that thought process, which was revolutionary, that people, they're not peasants, and people have a right to, consent to those who are governing. And that was what our war for independence was all about, because really the tyranny they were objecting to was nothing. King George III, he would be the greatest president we've ever had if he just governed. I mean, compared to what we've had in America and what we've put up since then. But they objected to that. They objected to the Stamp Act, and they threw tea in the Boston Harbor and things like that. But little chump change compared to what we've been going through. But the idea was that, we don't want to be under this rule. Why should we be under this rule of a guy? Now, what makes our tyranny so much worse is that it's not across the ocean. It's right here. It's right here among us at all levels in our areas, Washington, D.C., but locally too. So, this is not a king that's far away. It's the tyranny's right there at home. We can see it, and we somehow can't do anything about it. But I don't think Paine or Jefferson or anybody ever envisioned this type of tyranny. I mean, they would be amazed if they could see what happened. Like I said, they must be whirring at warp speed in their graves, trying to, contemplate what has happened here. But you can see that's what Paine was talking about. Basically, is that, why should we be subject to the rule of a monarch we don't agree to be? And this is, again, he's challenging a king. And he said, people ought to be able to form their own governments and consent to those who govern. And then later, Jefferson would, again, make sure he put that in the Declaration of Independence, that when any government no longer serves the purposes of the people, they have every right to alter or abolish it. Now, there's not anyone that's celebrating today in Washington, D.C. that would agree with that. The last thing they think you could, what do you mean? You don't have a right to alter or abolish this. We have rule. And unfortunately, you can't tell this story without what I say the second American Revolution was Abraham Lincoln in the 60s, when I think the consent of the governed was shattered forever, because the southern states no longer consented. And Lincoln said, no, you have to consent. And then after almost 1 million people died, it was established that, okay, this is not a voluntary union, and you can alter or abolish it. So we still had that document there, but it's contradicted by our history, at least since 1865. And so when people talk about it, I try to point that out, and they kind of give you a blank look, but it's important, because in Thomas Paine, Thomas Paine would be lucky to appear on podcasts like this if he was around today with his thoughts, because he was obviously an incredibly radical mind, especially for that time period. But
let's explore some of those radical thoughts, because that's what really drew me to him. A lot of people don't realize that he originally had in mind, and I can't remember the exact details, but he was proposing that the voting age be 25 and that the voting should be open to men and women and blacks and Indians. He was proposing this in the 1700s.
Yeah.
And when they wrote up the Constitution, they're like, yeah, we liked your earlier work, but this is a little too radical. This is too much. And that was one of those things that got him, even though he was initially held as a hero, as someone that riled up this revolution. Now he was kind of like, all right, man, you're too ahead of your time right now. We can't have this. And so that's kind of what kind of pushed him away. And maybe that could be a reason why we don't get taught too much about his life today. He criticized George Washington. He wrote him a scathing letter after, when he was in France. So there's a story that goes that him and Ben Franklin are talking, and Ben Franklin says, "My home is where liberty is." And Thomas Paine says, "My home is where liberty is not." And which is, if you think about it, think about how powerful that is. He doesn't want to go somewhere that it's easy. Fuck that shit. He wants something where work needs to be done to bring actual liberty to the people. That's what he was really after. And that's one of those powerful statements that really, really resonated with me. When he went to France, they were going through the revolution, but it was too far radical. These same people that at one point were vibing with what he was speaking about now went to the other extreme. And Thomas Paine got in some hot water for defending the execution of a king that he was earlier criticizing, And that's just a testament to the kind of person that Thomas Paine was. He didn't give a shit about sides. Even when at the very beginning of Common Sense, I am not affiliated with any political party. He's straight up telling you, I don't care about all that shit. What I care about is actual freedom for the people. And I don't know, that to me is one of those powerful things. And I want to get into a little bit more of those polarizing thoughts and views that he had, because I think it's worth remembering for people that may not know too much about him.
Yeah, well, I think if you look at a liberty meter, if you look at like founding fathers on a liberty meter, you would have Thomas Paine the farthest extreme in terms of purely 100% for human liberty. In terms of, he walked the walk, he believed everything, said he wanted everybody to vote and all those kinds of things. And he on the other end, you would have like George Washington, and Hamilton's not even on the chart because he didn't believe in liberty. But I mean, the more pragmatic people that were kind of conservative for that. And Jefferson would be, near Paine, but not in Patrick Henry, but not to that extreme. Paine was the real deal, as you said, and he also had to watch his step, because although all the founding fathers all seemed to be deists, I'm not sure what their religious beliefs were. They weren't traditional Christians. I'm not sure what Paine was. He
was a deist.
He was more, he didn't pay as much homage, I don't think, to God as even the deists did. So that may have gotten him in some kind of trouble. I mean, he wrote The Rights of Man, which is I think that was instrumental more in France. But and that's where, again, he was going against religious authority. We're saying how, because at that time, you got to remember, people today even still will quote the Bible. There's a verse in there about it's basically, I think it's from Old Testament, the Chronicles maybe, but it talks again about obeying the government, do what which is ridiculous. And you still have some fundamentals will quote that, and obviously Thomas Paine wasn't going to sit for that. So he was basically saying man has the right to do this. They have the right to govern themselves, to not be governed by men that you don't agree with. And this was a revolutionary concept. And again, Jefferson took it, and if he's the one that wrote it in incredible language that still resonates today, 250 years later. But today, Paine would be, as you said, a fairly radical figure today. I mean, even as far as we've got, because he, not that, mean, people think everybody should vote, obviously, but in terms of everything else, if you looked at all the founding fathers, he would be the one that you would look at and say, okay, well, this guy was open-minded. I think that's another thing to remember. How many people were open-minded back then? And Jefferson considered himself a free thinker, but Paine was I don't know. I've forgotten. I don't think Paine was a Freemason. I know some of them were.
So from what I was able to gather, there is no conclusive evidence of any Masonic affiliation. He did write a book talking about the symbology and everything, but it wasn't necessarily a good thing about Masonry. He was talking about how so many things from Masonry come from Christianity and Judaism, and that's what his book was about. However, he did rub shoulders with a lot of actual Masons, like Ben Franklin, George Washington, and such. And Ben Franklin is one of these guys that in history gets propped up as a wise, jolly, fat guy, good guy, and people completely forget that in his London home they found the bodies of 10 individuals, and no one seemed to really make that a big deal. Holy shit!
Oh man, I covered that in Crimes and Cover-Ups, and I talked about how I showed how the reporters, the modern court historians, they just fell all over themselves. Well, is that? Well, I don't know that I'm not saying he murdered people, but if you find most people don't have human remains in the walls of their house, so that's at least suspicious, right? So, but the incident, couldn't have been, he couldn't have, what do you mean? That he's the first person you look at, it was his house. So, but Franklin also was a member of the Hellfire Club, which was, very beyond Freemasonry. That was a very blasphemous club, and it was, they held orgies with nuns dressed as prostitutes, and people credit Aleister Crowley with that really horrific saying, "Do what thou wilt," and that actually comes from the Hellfire Club.
That comes from the original John Wilkes. John Wilkes Booth's like great grandfather or something like that. That's I mean, it's crazy how it's all connected when you really think about it.
It is. Well, this is the tidbit that, if you read that book, you probably know, but one of the most historical things I found, and it's kind of cool to think of it, but, Franklin, against all logic, was somehow a ladies' man. I mean, you've seen how he looked, but somehow apparently he was quite the stud for the 1700s and, cavorting in Paris. But supposedly his main pickup line was to get women to decide, would you care to join me in the pursuit of happiness? I mean, that's kind of cool, but
yeah. Hear ye. Holy smokes. Yeah, I mean, I suppose we can talk about where we're at today. Today is the 4th of July, and I brought this up last week with Charlie Robinson, but it's wild to me when I really think about it. I sit down and look at my pay stubs, and I see how much in taxes I'm paying and how many hours a week I have to work just to keep the lights on. And the people in the 1700s, they were pissed off for far less, and they took action. They took action. They dumped those damn tea packets in the water. And they actually did something. They mobilized. And yet we are in far worse shape today, with, taxes and hours worked and whatnot. And we are completely pacified as a nation.
We are.
We're not going to do anything. I mean, if 2020 showed us anything, it showed us that we will not do anything. If the government tells us, stay 6 feet apart, get these gene therapy drugs, or you will get fired, we do it. Some people may bitch and complain, but the vast majority will go ahead and do it. And it's a tragedy in my eyes. What do you think about that, Mr. Jeffries?
No, yeah, exactly. I mean, I talk about that all the time, but I think not in our defense, because we're incredibly dumbed down, and we won't come together. We're like Orwell's proles. In 1984, Orwell talked about how the proles outnumbered the party members to such a degree, he said it would be just like a horse getting up and shaking off flies. And that's what we are. We outnumber these people by the hundreds of millions in the United States and by the billions around the world. And yet we're continually under their yoke. They are subjecting us to tyranny. We let them do it because we can't come together. I mean, look at your neighborhood, look at your workplace, whatever the petty disputes people have. They get distracted not just by race and religion and gender, but just, whether, how did that guy get that, especially if somebody's on food stamps, how did that guy get that size TV, or how did you afford that car? We get distracted by what the other guy's doing. And we can't look at the common enemy. And that's the problem. What made the founding fathers different, what gave them a huge advantage, is that they were the richest people in the colonies. They were the 1%. So, I mean, I'm sure if Elon Musk and Bill Gates and Donald Trump and Carlos Slim and, all these people, Zuckerberg, if they wanted to have Jeff Bezos, if they wanted to have a revolution, they wanted to overturn, I don't know what they'd overturn because they run things, but if they wanted to overturn an external force, they'd be able to do it because they had the wherewithal. Back then, those guys had the wherewithal. They had the organizational structure, they had the funds, and to whatever degree they needed funds. But I think that's why it was successful. They were able to organize the Constitutional Convention. They had most of the powerful people on their side. They had to, persuade some, like, one of the most powerful parts of the Declaration of Independence was Jefferson's really strong condemnation of slavery. Well, they had to take that out because they wouldn't have gotten some of the people to vote, to declare independence with it in there. So they had to have some compromises. But today, I don't think, it would take so many of us, and you still need some kind of leadership. And again, you see the fighting in the alt media. Everybody thinks everybody else is a disinfo agent. They think, you're a shill, or I'm not going to agree with you because of one thing or another. How do we come together? We have a common enemy. We know that, and that's what I'm writing a Substack today. We need a Declaration of Independence too. We need to declare it again because, in that original declaration, Jefferson, chronicled the abuses and usurpations, a long train from King George III, but they're nothing. You said they're child's play. Little taxes here or there, failure to enact laws, and basically not giving them taxation without representation, which was another reason for the revolution. And we definitely have taxation without representation today. But when you see that, you realize that if we listed the abuses and usurpations, I'm trying to in my article. I just listed some of them. I can't even begin to chronicle them, especially since like 1865 when the Civil War ended. When they set up Reconstruction and had military occupation of the South for 10 years, or almost 10 years, and that birthed the Ku Klux Klan and Jim Crow and all that stuff. And the false flag starting with 1898 and getting involved in wars that had nothing, that violated George Washington's farewell address and John Quincy Adams' decree that America does not go abroad in search of foreign monsters to destroy. That's all we do. And so how do you can't even just in my lifetime, just going back and just things like Waco, where the government, murdered a bunch of citizens, most of them children, in their own home, and nothing happened. Nobody talked about impeaching Clinton. The Oklahoma City side, but 9/11, obviously, the incredible inside job that we all know. The voting fraud that has been, going on for too long, but certainly we saw it in Pat Buchanan's campaign and Ron Paul's campaign. Nobody did anything about it. It wasn't until 2020 where you had a president like Trump complaining about it, when none of these other guys complained, but still nothing happened. Even with the president of the United States claiming he'd been robbed, 62 out of 64 courts or whatever wouldn't even look at the evidence. So again, the system, is so close to us. And a lot of this problem is because we've allowed, that problem began in the beginning of the Republic, when over the objections of Jefferson, especially, John Marshall was able to usurp power, and they came up with judicial review. Today, we are still under the yoke of judicial review. So both left and right, they're basically, when they practice politics now, the goal is to get something before a judge that is sympathetic to you, and maybe who rule in our favor. And that's stupid. It's dumb. And it's, even if you get it, that's not the way it was intended. For one judge, since we talk about the immigration problem, go back to Prop 187 in California. in like 1990, whatever, with late 80s, 1990, where in a different California voted overwhelmingly on a public referendum, overwhelmingly to tie all government benefits to citizenship status. And that's a very common sense thing. That would be a first step. And what happened? It went before a federal judge, and he just said, nope, unconstitutional. That was it. So the will of all those millions of people who voted for it was overturned. And it's happened on other smaller things, like when they were trying to legalize marijuana a couple times, referendums, and a judge overturned it. But that's not what I don't think that's what the founders intended, but that's where we are now. And unfortunately, with the collapse of MAGA and Trump's turn a really dark road, beginning with denying the Epstein files and then attacking Iran, we don't have anything. So you're at the point where Tucker Carlson, says he's going to, form a new third party, and people like me will probably get sucked into that too, like I did for everything else.
I love how honest you are, though. I can appreciate that. Yeah, see, that's where I kind of maybe see things a little different from you, Mr. Jeffries. I just feel a lot of these, we're constantly being psyoped. Constantly. Mm-hmm. I have a new show called After Dark Radio with Wheezy, and the last episode I did was on the Newburgh conspiracy, and I think you and I touched on it a little bit last time we got together. And that is the first official American conspiracy that happened in 1783, where the revolutionary veterans, war veterans, were kind of pissed off. They wanted to get paid. They hadn't been paid. They were ready to mutiny, start another revolution. And we are told that George Washington comes in unannounced at the right time, at the right place, puts on his glasses, and gives a powerful, heartwarming speech. And it was at that moment that the mutiny ended magically. This is what we're told. Mm-hmm. I refuse to believe any of it. I feel it's more propaganda, especially after reading more of how George Washington treated Thomas Paine later. I start to get... This is going to sound sacrilegious because a lot of people view as George Washington as the greatest of all time, the founding father, the first president of the United States. I view him as a complete scumbag. And when you realize that he's a third-degree Mason, master Mason, not only that, and he railroaded Thomas Paine. This guy, in my opinion, obviously people are going to disagree with it, but he was a complete scumbag piece of shit who was just the face of a movement that took hold out here in America. Maybe this is me going more and more conspiratorial, but I just don't trust any of it. I think we're constantly getting inundated with propaganda, and it's hard to decipher what is actually real and what is a fairy tale and this and that. And that's where I'm at these days. And so when I saw Donald Trump, I didn't think he was going to bring any change or hope. I knew he had always been a scumbag. And so seeing him do what he's doing today, to me at least, was not even a surprise. I'm like, I wasn't shocked. This is what I expected. This is what we're getting. And I feel his presidency is laying down the footwork for a more disastrous administration to come in. Each administration just lays the groundwork for the next one is how I see it. I mean, when you look at the Biden and Kamala Harris, it was just laying down the foundation for Trump to come in. That's all they do. In my opinion, I could be dead wrong.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're going to have to go away, so I think, to top this, but yeah, in which you were discussing, it sounds like you were talking about the Shays Rebellion back then. It's very similar, and I talk about that in my book. Daniel Shays was a veteran of the Revolutionary War, and a lot of these guys were. And again, unfortunately, that was a trend that went up through the 1920s when the bonus army from World War I, they were promised a bonus and they didn't get it, and so they gathered together in tents in Washington D.C., and then they were chased away by a group that included young Douglas MacArthur and young George Patton, to their disgrace. But Daniel Shays was a very populist figure. I think it was Gore Vidal who wrote that he considered him the first populist. I'm a populist. Thank you, Blakey. That's very nice. I'm the coolest guy in the entire internet.
Let me. I don't think I've addressed this, but I'm wearing a powdered wig, everyone.
Yeah.
It's the 4th of July. I'm wearing a powdered wig.
Very
I've got
cool.
my Continental uniform right here.
That's
Let's
very cool.
go.
Yeah,
let's go.
You definitely, going all in, but you also had the Whiskey Rebellion. The Whiskey Rebellion. George Washington did not act very appropriately, in my view, in that it was a show of force where he crushed it, especially again because the Whiskey Rebellion was over taxes. That was what the main, they were basically saying, hey, they're not being true to meet the new boss, same as the old boss, basically, is what they were saying. In Shays Rebellion, they just wanted to be paid. And again, that was a trend, unfortunately, that you can read about in other places. So I agree. I mean, I wouldn't go as far as you would, George Washington, because George Washington did give up power willingly, which is, he could have been a monarch. A lot of people wanted him to be, and he could have stayed for as long as he wanted. And he willingly stepped down after 2 terms. This is why we had those 2 terms until Roosevelt came along and, corrupted it. It wasn't really anything in the Constitution about it. But he was the ultimate pragmatic politician, and he gave a great farewell address. But he at the beginning of the Republic, the major divide in terms of politics was between the Jeffersonians and the Hamiltonians, and unfortunately, the Hamiltonians won with the national bank and the debt and all the other terrible stuff that bigger central government. Jefferson's group lost, and it was mainly because George Washington was persuaded by Hamilton rather than Jefferson.
Hamilton is an interesting guy that is also fascinating because he was pro-monarchy, yes. And he gets sprinkled in as one of these founding fathers all the time. But he's also, a lot of people surmise that he was probably one of these invisible hands writing these letters to piss people off and get them to mutiny again, because he was a piece of shit, but he could write. He was a damn good writer as well.
Oh, he was brilliant. He was brilliant, and he was a troll. I mean, I recounted, I think it was in Crimes and Cover-Ups, where it was revealed that if he was around today, he'd be like, doing things on the internet like Cass Sunstein would want, or whatever.
Chud the Builder, Hamilton.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's what he adopted a personality in newspapers or something, and because he was trying to, I forget what he was. Maybe it was the Whiskey Rebellion was trying to something like that, but
it was a Newburgh conspiracy where he gets a lot of that credit.
Yeah, but he was basically a troll.
And how did he die? That's a fascinating part.
Yeah, well, it's most, and I don't know if they didn't get rid of dueling after that, but that's definitely the most famous duel because it was him and Aaron Burr, who was Jefferson's vice president, and he was killed by Aaron Burr. I mean, that
for those people not familiar with this story, for those people not too familiar with this little story, give us a little synopsis of this story because this is this is a cool little nugget of history right here.
It is, but because Burr again was Jefferson's vice president, but Jefferson didn't like him because in those days the way the voting went is the person with the second most votes became vice president. So Burr, in fact, Jefferson barely beat Burr. I think it went to the House of Representatives where there was a tied vote at first, and so they were at odds. And Burr's been accused of lots of stuff. I don't know if he's guilty of everything. He wanted to form his own republic and all these kinds of things. And in terms of, I've forgotten what the actual thing was that triggered the duel. But yeah, these people, you talk about it, civilization. I mean, people could go and slap you with a club, and that meant you had to go shoot and maybe die. I mean, it was insane that was normal for so long. And here you had, again, just imagine today, Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, and I don't know, some big,
Kamala Harris and J.D. Vance.
Well, yeah, there you go, yeah. And then they have a duel. I mean, it's like, what? I mean, it's insane, but that's
wild, yeah.
Yeah, it is. And so most people don't know, and it's not really reported because Hamilton has become the only one of the founding fathers who's not a dead white racist to the powers that be now. They love this guy. That's why I made him a hip black Broadway star, because if he was alive today, he would be in the CFR. He'd be attending Bilderberg meetings. None of the others would, but he had that mindset. He was a globalist, and so he would have been.
What's
fine.
wild to me is how Hamilton gets this love all these years later, and Thomas Paine kind of gets forgotten about. Even though, in my opinion, Thomas Paine was the guy.
Of course,
after looking at this guy, I like Thomas Jefferson a lot, but to me, Thomas Paine is ahead of him in many respects, because he, like you said at the very beginning, he actually walked the talk. I mean, he wasn't just about writing pamphlets and doing this. No, he was actively moving for it. Like I said at the very beginning, in that quote where Ben Franklin says, my home is where liberty is at. And he responds, my home is where liberty is not.
Yeah. That's
profound,
great.
Man.
It is profound. But I think, Paine's mistake was not to come up with the idea that the individual state, that the federal government should assume all the debts of the individual states, as Jefferson did, thereby creating paving the way for the national debt, and also not to be pushing for the banksters so much. I mean, Hamilton fought for the national charter of the bank, and that battle went on between him and Jefferson, and later between other forces and Andrew Jackson for a long time, until eventually it culminated in the Federal Reserve, and we all know what happened there, where we all lost. But I mean, that was a big battle, and Jefferson understood that. I think he said bankers are more dangerous to liberty than standing armies, and he's exactly right. But I think if Paine had adopted those positions, maybe he might have had a chance to be on Broadway. But so George Hamilton is the only one that fits that deal, because he would have. I think he would have been cool with, going global and being involved in all these foreign conflicts. He had a globalist mindset, and he's the only one of the founders really that did. And so I think, unfortunately, Thomas Paine is at the other end, and he got short shrift because he was a true believer. And there's no telling if he had governed, because he didn't get a chance to govern. If he had been elected president, or even if he had been governor of a state or something, I think you would have seen a difference in the way I don't know. I'd have to look at the record, but I don't know that Paine is on the record in terms of what he thought about the Shays Rebellion or the Whiskey Rebellion. But my guess is he would have been on the side of Shays and the people that forged the Whiskey Rebellion. I think. I don't know for sure, but my guess is, because he kept it real. And that's what a true revolutionary would have done. They would have realized that when they did the Whiskey, they would say, well, you've done the same thing to them that you objected to King George doing. But instead, Washington, with, again, Hamilton right there besides him, really pushing him, you got to crush that rebellion. Same thing with the Shays Rebellion. I mean, there's nothing more basic. You ask these guys to fight, and they went through hell. We're told at Valley Forge they didn't have shoes to wear in the middle of winter, and they're starving, and then you don't want to pay them years later. But unfortunately, that's what happens. And we see our veterans are still treated that way. That's why it's amazing that people still want to fight these wars, because they get mistreated, and then they can't get medical care. They can't, it's not a good deal.
Yeah. It's kind of wild when you look back at history, how so many things ring true today. Like, things don't really change. Maybe the technology, maybe some things look different on the outside, but it's really the same nonsense that goes on. I know we only got a few more minutes left, but I wanted to ask you, and I know last time we talked a little bit of Lincoln, and one of the things that still rings in my head from the conversation we last had was when I gave you my theory on Henry Rathbone, and you started, you were like, holy smokes, you're the first Henry Rathbone conspiracy theorist I've ever come across.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, just for funsies, do you still think that's a little far-fetched, or did it make sense even then? How?
Well, I mean, we know. Look, Dave McGowan, before he died, I think and I've been compared to him, and I'm honored by that by a lot of people, but he died way too soon. But he was writing a series on the Lincoln assassination. It was fascinating. I think he was going in the direction of saying it was a false flag. It didn't happen.
Yeah.
That's the way it looked to me. That's where he was going. He didn't get to go there. So that's, saying that Rathbone was is no more outrageous than that.
That's where I got it from. McGowan is the one that planted the seeds. And so I did the audiobook version of it, and you can find that on After Dark Radio. And I've listened to it so many times. When you read it, that's what McGowan was saying. Henry Rathbone was the prime suspect, because who else gives a deposition 3 times verbatim in exactly the same way? And then when you think about what happened to Henry Rathbone later, he goes to Germany and then stages an attack where self-inflicted wounds are involved. You could say that's exactly what happened at Ford Theater. And the fact that you didn't get any other depositions except Henry Rathbone's, you didn't get any from Mrs. Lincoln, Mrs. Mary Todd, or Clara Harris. No other depositions, just Henry Rathbone's. I think it's a compelling case. And then when you look at all the other funny business, a one-shot Derringer, his only escape route being a jump from the freaking box down. I mean, none of it makes any sense. And then McGowan is the one that laid down the seeds about the Seward Mansion attack never happening.
Yes.
And I am all in on that, because I think when you look at the evidence, you see that Lewis Payne Powell was framed. Why, if he was the suspect, why would you need to plant evidence on him? If he was indeed the suspect, why in all the pictures that we see of Lewis Payne Powell, doesn't he have any signs of struggle, any scratches on him? And why did they find a different gun on him when he was booked, and then find the alleged gun over at the Seward home? Why did they destroy the Seward home in the early 1900s? Wasn't this a historical moment? Shouldn't this have been a landmark? And they brought it down. There's so many parts to that. I'd be willing to debate anyone on the Seward Mansion attack, thinking that it was completely nonsense and it never happened.
No, I think you're right, and again that part has been largely ignored by historians. They the more recent years of the Lincoln conspiracy came out in 1976, I think. They made a documentary on it, and it was a book based, and that was the first time I know where they stressed that Booth and his conspirators had plotted to kidnap Lincoln for quite a while, supposedly before that. And then he enlisted these conspirators and gave them each assignments. And we're told Atzerodt got drunk or chickened out, or he was supposed to kill Johnson. And Lewis Payne was the one that went there. And again, we're considering Seward's condition. He was old. He was very sickly. He was in bed. And the fact that he had, I don't know how many knife wounds they had, he claimed, the fact that he surved that, and Lewis Payne was a huge guy.
Yeah.
I mean, he looked
over 6 foot tall.
Yeah. I mean, and he looked, he looks very sturdy and strapping.
And why did Seward survive that? Because luckily for him, apparently, this is the official story, he got in a carriage accident a short time before this and had this neck brace. It's so preposterous.
Saved by the neck brace.
Story.
Yeah, no,
it's nonsense.
I love the way McGowan's mind worked, because my mind goes there sometimes too. But I love the way he analyzed those photos taken of Payne, especially aboard the ship Montauk or whatever the ship was they were on, by I think Timothy O'Sullivan, very famous photographer, and they do look like headshots for movie stars. Yeah. Especially Payne. Payne was a good-looking guy, but it looks like he's posing like he's going to Hollywood. I mean, he doesn't. None of them do, but he really doesn't look like a suspect. Most people look at their mugshots, but he looks like it's a picture he's sending to a producer.
Yeah, and when in any other time in history has the Assistant Secretary of War been assigned bodyguard assignments on inmates? Thomas Eckert was assigned the bodyguard of Lewis Payne Powell.
Yep, exactly. He turned him down too. And all these, I mean, and I wrote about that's how you ended up with a Rathbone, because everybody else turned Lincoln down.
Ulysses S. Grant.
Yeah,
ghosted him that the very day of the play. I mean, if you can go to Ford Theater. Yeah, you can go to Ford Theater today, and they have at the museum they have the poster showing Ulysses S. Grant is going to be Lincoln. So for Ulysses S. Grant to say, you know what, man, that's cool and all, but I'm going to take the midnight train out of town.
Mm-hmm. Of course, they blame Lincoln's wife for that because Lincoln, and I think personally, I think Mary Todd Lincoln's pretty interesting. I think she's gotten some bad press. I mean, because she was the first conspiracy theorist, much like Marguerite Oswald's mother was the first one, because she basically blamed Johnson. She blamed John F. Parker, who she had recommended.
She recommended him.
That's exactly. Yes, exactly. Oddly enough. So it's who knows? But I mean, I think that, and then later Robert Todd Lincoln, who became oligarch and his big literal fat cat. He gained a lot of weight and he looked just like the people, the kind of a robber baron look. And what
are the odds that he was there part of his dad's assassination? He was at the Garfield assassination and he was at the McKinley's assassination. He was also, who was it? Garfield that died of medical malpractice, where they shoved the hands to get the bullet, and that's what got him killed. Well, you know who recommended that doctor to Garfield? Robert Todd Lincoln.
Yeah, how about that? Yeah,
Robert Todd Lincoln is one of these super crazy guys. And when you hear the name Robert Todd Lincoln, how dare you? This was Abraham Lincoln's son. This guy was a good guy. No, he was not. He was far from it.
He wasn't, and he committed his mother to. I think it's kind of a cruel act. I don't think she was insane, but so that's the reason I brought her up, is because that has always been the rationale they used to say why Grant didn't go, because Mary Todd Lincoln was so crazy that she had this insane jealousy of every woman, including Julia Grant, Grant's wife. So they just didn't want to deal with it, or whatever. So and people go, okay, well that makes sense. I've heard Mary Todd Lincoln's crazy, but that's the superficial way people look at history. But they something like the Lincoln assassination, that people, again, they not only don't know about Paine's attack on Seward and the fact that they were supposed to go after all the others, they don't realize that they were conspirators. I mean, I think they weren't conspirators, but they were convicted and hanged. A lot of people don't, including Mary Surratt, who was the first, last woman I think hanged in U.S. history, who was definitely not guilty of anything. But but again, that's another story. But if you read the trial of the conspirators, and they were trying to stop somebody from saying something, I don't know, but I think McGowan was onto something, and it's too bad we didn't see where his mind was going to take all that, because he came up with, he made me look at it differently, because I had researched that for a long time, and I never thought about some of the things he mentioned.
Yeah, that's what I've been trying to do ever since I've read his books, is just try to pick up and try to, I mean, obviously he had his own views, but he's kind of influenced me in many ways, even in many events today. Like the way whenever I hear something big happen, a Trump assassination attempt or anything, I feel like I put on my McGowan hat. And I immediately wait a minute, hold up. Let me look at the evidence real quick before I jump into any conclusions.
Well, look at the work he did on the Boston bomb. He would have had a lot of fun with, especially the Butler. Well, especially I think the White House Correspondents' Dinner was even more ridiculous than that.
Oh, but man,
And I wrote about that. I mean, come on, that was just ridiculous. The guy winds up naked on the floor with a tin foil sheet over him. Why was he naked? Why'd you take his clothes off? No sense in that make.
Yeah. And then the reporter just prior to that, like, oh, we're expecting a banger. Or she said something along those lines.
Yeah. Shots fired. Shots will be fired. It's like, okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, like, with a big smile on her face too. Yeah.
Yeah. Then you got Charlie Kirk and one. I mean, we're just surrounded and constantly fed nonstop propaganda. This is the day and age where we're at. And I think, going back to what we said at the very beginning, sometimes I have a hard time wondering why people that suffered much less were able to mobilize, against the dumping the tea overboard in Boston and whatnot. And today we have conditions probably worse, where we're getting taxed by our government. We're getting false flagged and psyoped by our government constantly. I think it's the propaganda, the divide and conquer.
Yeah, sure.
Like you said at the very beginning, even in the alternative media, we're constantly, oh, you believe this about this psyop? Well, I can't talk to you anymore. Wait a minute, we're on the same team, really. I just view things a little bit differently, but we're on the same team, man. But people get really, really aggressive about the minutest of details, and I think that's to our detriment as a whole.
Oh, it is, and I end up arguing. As I admit, you said I'm honest. I mean, I get I still have a Kennedy fanboy in me. I look at RFK Jr. I can see Rabbi Shmuley behind him. He might as well have a gun to his head. And I listen to the nonsense he says about Israel and the IDF and everything. So and I know he doesn't believe it, because, like I said, I went at the 9/11 Turning the Tide conference, Tide conference. Richard Gage ran in D.C. last September. I went to it. Got to meet my hero Dennis Kucinich, another one of my guys that maybe he's compromised too. I like him, but I listened to him talk, and this guy, reiterated once again how opposed he is to Zionism, how opposed, what a critic he is of Israel. Bobby Kennedy Jr. named Kucinich as his campaign manager when he ran for president. You don't do that if you really hold the beliefs that he claims he does. Because Kucinich would have said, what the hell am I have to do anything with you? What are you talking about? You're a shill and apologist for Israel. You think the IDF never killed any civilians? So something happened there where he was inserted as his handler. And unfortunately, he's now kind of a pathetic figure because he still has to do it. But so those things happen. But whether, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, these people, I listen to them because they say 90% of what they say I agree with. And they're probably, they're probably compromised too. And there's somebody behind them. I don't know. But all I can do is
that's their job. To feed you that stuff that's going to sound good. And that's how they hook the vast majority of people. I think that's the role, because, if they were spewing nonstop nonsense, they wouldn't be peddling them up. But because they are saying things that are pleasing to a vast amount of people, that's why they go around, and they will claim that they are being suppressed by the algorithms. Even like a Nick Fuentes, I'm like, oh yeah, these people are the most.
Well, he can see through. That guy is so obvious. I don't know how anybody can possibly fall for him, but people do. Because he's slick, and so maybe you say, I've fallen for a lot of them. Tulsi Gabbard was really cute, and she held my book up. I got to meet her, and so of course I was a little smitten with her. So it happens. I admit it, but
I also fell for the RFK Jr. one. I will admit that, because I was like, I had heard him going podcast to podcast talking about how the CIA killed his dad and the cover up that ensued. I'm like, oh man, he was talking about COVID in a way that was pleasing to the ear. And I was like, man, I like RFK Jr. And then I started digging into a little bit of his past, and then all these Epstein connections started coming out.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. They're all connected. Epstein. Man. Yeah. They're all connected.
Epstein is the one common denominator with all these guys.
I saw I wrote like three parts of on the Epstein files. Peter Seacosh has done a lot of great research for me, but there's one we didn't even find that I saw. I call my cousin Hakeem Jeffries, the Speaker of the House. He's in there where he's writing a letter to Epstein asking him for money or something. It's like what all these guys are connected to this stuff.
Yes.
And so
and it's not just these politicians. I was watching TV earlier today, and they were showing some boats in New York, boats from different nations, as a 250-year anniversary display and whatnot. And I was watching the CBS reporters, I think it was, and they're talking, and they've got their nice little gold bracelets and ring. And I'm just watching them talk and speak. And I'm like, this is just propaganda. This person behind, when the camera shuts off, is a whole different person. The persona we see is on TV. These pundits, these media heads, as soon as the camera turns off, there's someone else, unrecognizable. And this is the constant fake reality that we are given to on a regular basis on the TV, through our politicians, through everything.
It is. No, we are, it's hard. But I'm not going to change the way I am. I watch too many Frank Capra films, so I fall for things too easy. And then but it's like I said, Tucker Carlson's going to form a third party, and they'll probably suck me in because he says stuff that I agree with. So and maybe I'll be dumb enough even to vote again. I don't know, but it's possible. But I'll waste 5 minutes of my time, and they won't count the vote. So it's not that big a deal.
The honesty. Yeah. Well,
you gotta be honest.
Absolutely, 100%. And see, that's what I said at the very beginning. There may be things that you and I view completely differently. And the thing that I've always admired about you is that you are speaking how you feel, and that's the honest truth. And we both come, even though we may see things from polar opposite at times, we will both, you and I, and I'm speaking for you right now, but I think you can vouch for me that we both agree in the importance of freedom of speech.
Absolutely.
Where, having discourse, being able to talk with someone. This is what Thomas Paine was all about. When you study his early life, he loved debating people. He loved, if there was a piece of legislation that was getting talked about, he wanted to break it down and debate it and show why the piece of legislation was nonsense. And that's what happens when you are able to discourse with things that you don't agree with. You can have great things can happen from it. And when people try to shut it down or censor you, or you can't talk about this or that, it's a travesty. It does no one no good. And so before I let you go, Tom or Mr. Don Jeffries, let people know where they can find you. I do have your Substack on the description, but if there's any other places that you want people to find you.
Yeah, Substack is the place that I'm not, only place I'm not shadow banned. Donald Jeffries at Substack.com. I protest just like my podcast. At Don Jeffries on X. I was gone there. They disappeared my account for a while. Now it's suddenly back. So, okay, it's cool. So as long as I stay there, it's at Don Jeffries. Easy to find there. I have 10 books out there. I'm presently writing my 11th, which is on sports. It's going to be my most controversial one. Believe it or not, I probably won't be able to get it published. But everything I write is controversial. I don't know any other way to look at it. So, I think that we need to, but I don't take myself seriously. And so I laugh at everything. I laugh at myself too. And I think we have to do it because not only do any of us know what the hell's going on, but I don't like people that take themselves too seriously. And, we're all trying to analyze this, and we're doing it. Most of us are doing it from our basements. That's all we can do. We don't have any. I don't have any people or staff or anything like that. The bigger ones do, but most of us that are trying to do this, we're doing this in our spare time, and we're trying to analyze things, and we each get, we end up getting some kind of an audience, and it's really cool to know that people listen to you, but. I'm as suspicious as anybody else. If I see somebody that's got 1 million subscribers, I'm going to assume they were installed because I know how hard it is to get those people. So.
Yeah. And before I let you go, Mr. Don Jeffries, tell us about the name of your books and where they can find your books.
Well, Hidden History is still by far my bestseller. It's done really well. Not that I've made much money from it because writers don't make much money. They give you a very small rate. I make more money writing on Substack. The last one, the most recent one is American Memory Hole, How the Court Historians Promote Disinformation. You can see conveniently located over both shoulders are my books, including Masking the Truth, which someone in the chat kindly mentioned, the most censored book in the world, my COVID book, Survival of the Richest, my book of the economy. I got Bullyocracy up there. On Borrowed Fame, my book about showbiz, Crimes and Cover-Ups, which is a prequel to Hidden History. And American Memory Hole, How the Court Historians Promote Disinformation is my latest. That's essentially the third volume of Hidden History. And it just goes more into how we've been lied to. And that's the most important thing I try to tell. When anybody starts saying, well, come on, you can't doubt that. I'll say, look, I doubt everything. We've been lied to about everything. So why would you think that, okay, but, they lie about everything else, but this particular thing, they decided to tell the truth. They lie about everything.
That's so frustrating. I can't stand when I hear that. It's like, and I think that's why, unfortunately, people get sucked back in.
Yeah.
It's I guess it's a mechanism that works for the propagandists. Mr. Don Jeffries, thank you so much. I know it was a little bit of a short notice, and you agreed to it. We definitely have to do another one. I always enjoy chatting with you, and it's always a good time.
Anytime. Always happy to come on your show. Appreciate it.
Alrighty. Thank you, Mr. Jeffries. Enjoy the rest of your 4th of July.
Okay, man. You too. Take care.
Thank you. All right, y'all. That was Mr. Don Jeffries. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I'm gonna go a little bit. Give the people, we the people, some content to chew on. If you're on YouTube, which, what do we got? We got like 9 people on YouTube. We don't have that many people. I'm gonna ask you guys to go to Rumble, and that way I can share my thoughts, because unfortunately YouTube, we were just talking about freedom of speech. YouTube is not a platform for freedom of speech. So if you guys want to hear me with my look at my luscious locks, man. Oh man, looking all exquisite and such. Just kidding. I'm fucking around. Anyways, I'm gonna shut the stream down on YouTube, go to Rumble, and let's see. How do I remove this? Okay. All right. Thanks everyone on YouTube, and hopefully I see you guys on Rumble. If not, thank you guys for coming out.